Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's event on thinking like a hacker and securing your data. Over the next hour, we'll explore some of the biggest data breaches to date, look into the techniques hackers can use to breach an organization, and end with a look at prevention tips and best practices. We'll send you a copy of the recording after the event if you'd like to rewatch anything. And as we go, if you have questions, please submit them through the control panel in the questions pane. If we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to follow up after the presentation. I'm here today with my co-host, Dan Freeman. Dan, are you all set?
I sure am, thank you.
Wonderful. To give you all a quick introduction to Dan, he has spent the last 10 years of his career in various security roles, ranging from systems engineer to security officer, and he currently serves as senior solutions consultant at HelpSystems for the Go Anywhere product line. Looking at our agenda for today, we'll start by discussing cybersecurity statistics, define basic hacking terminology, dissect common hacking techniques and recent data breaches, explore advanced persistent threats, and then dive into what you can do in your organization to secure your data. We'll finish with a quick Q&A session if we have time. Okay, let's get going. Take it away, Dan.
All right, I appreciate it. Welcome all, and thank you for joining. Usually, much to my boss's dismay, I like to kick things off lighthearted with a joke or maybe a funny anecdote of some kind. But today, I just wanted to give my condolences and prayers for all those suffering from the devastating floods that have struck the Midwest. In fact, even some of our own staff here in Go Anywhere here in Ashland have been affected. Godspeed and quick recovery, hopefully. All right, with that, let's get rolling on our topic. First couple slides here, like Anna mentioned, we're going to talk about some cybersecurity statistics, specifically with cost. Some of these things here, just to kind of look at, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at when we do have large data breaches. According to the Ponemon Institute is where I'm going to get a lot of these references from. You can see that the average per cost for all kind of data breaches was $148 in 2018 as compared to $141 in 2017. Those are kind of, they kind of vary from year to year. It totally depends upon, who was actually breached, the actual cost that they kind of put into after the breach to make sure that they bolster their security, things like that. So that's kind of just one indicator to kind of look at that. Second thing, looking at the United States, Canada, and Germany continue to have the highest per capita costs at $233, $202, and $188 per record, respectively. Probably because we are I guess when we say we, United States, Canada, and Germany being kind of those high targeted areas, or probably get the most traffic when it comes to some of the major organizations that are being targeted for whatever reason. And we'll kind of look at some of the industries that are getting targeted as well. And on the lower end, Turkey, India, Brazil have much lower per capita costs at $105, $68, and $67 per record, respectively. Moving on here, looking at the frequency of these data breaches, I don't think it's very surprising. And this slide might be, hopefully you guys can read that. The one on the far left there being the financial services industry. I think when most people think about data breaches, they do think of financial industries, getting credit card information, bank account information, things like that. I don't think that's a big surprise. Services, any kind of point of sale services, areas, manufacturing, technology. One of the ones that we see kind of on the lower end, on the third column there, healthcare, doesn't seem to be as far as the frequency of data breaches by industry. But as we all know, or at least I think most of us here, and one of the actual breaches that we'll go into later on Anthem, definitely kind of points to a lot of the healthcare information. Although it's not a very high frequency, you'll look at that second part of that slide, the per capita cost per industry. You see that healthcare being by far the #1 cost by industry. Now, what is it special about healthcare, or what we call PHI, or protected health information? Definitely the quantity, not quality on this, or sorry, quality, not quantity. But why is PHI so valuable? When you think of the financial industry, credit cards, account information, they really do have a limited shelf life. So if somebody gets something hacked or they get their credit card stolen, it's pretty simple as to just cancel that card and move on. Now, with your health records, that information doesn't change. Even after you've been hacked, those things, that kind of information is not going to change. In fact, one of the resources that I was looking at, the sale price of a credit card number by itself is around $1 on the dark web. If you add PHI to that, it jumps all the way to $20 per record. Now, if you get a full profile with everything, a lot of PII, PHI, credit card numbers and things like that, it can be all the way up to $500. So you can see PHI can really, really escalate those costs. And also healthcare costs, by the way, and I'm sure everybody feels this pain point, have really gone up. So the way to do healthcare fraud by getting other people's healthcare information, that can be a big cost savings as well. So we can definitely see PHI being a big reason why folks are targeting that type of information. This stat here, I really like this one actually. There's a lot more too within this Ponemon Institute chart, but this one's pretty cool. On the right-hand side with the excuse me, the black barcodes up at the top, we have the certain types of action items, we'll say, that actually help you save money per breach. If you look at those top four, we've got incident response team, we've got extensive use of encryption, business continuity involvement, and employee training. So 3 of the top 4 are really dealing with human practices. Training the human, having humans do certain processes to make things better for, preventing, or at least in the case of these data breaches, to make them less costly. With the exception of the extensive use of encryption, which we'll talk about later. But it's really important because when we talk about user training, I think that kind of goes to the wayside, and a lot of people like to try and rely on technology because technology is getting great and everything, but it really, really comes down to the weakest link. And as we all know, and we'll see going through this presentation, the weak link is still going to be that human at some point, some way. So it's interesting to note kind of those are the things, if you really, really hone on those, if you train that human for whatever reason, whether it's incident response team, business continuity, employee training, it'll help you save money. On the other end, the other spectrum down at the bottom there, we look at that third-party involvement and extensive cloud migration. Third-party involvement, I would say kind of think of, anytime you have contractors or anybody that you're dealing with that's not a part of your organization, obviously that's really hard to keep track of them adhering to your security policies. A great example, we're not going to dive into it, but Target, when they got hit, pretty popular breach, the reason they did get hit is because of one of their third-party vendors, I believe it was an HVAC company. Actually, that's the way the hackers got in, through their back door. So their bad security practices with one of their third-party vendors cost them a huge breach and obviously a lot of money. Cloud migrations, I think, are pretty straightforward. If you're having a cloud migration, that's going to involve a lot of IT resources. If you get hacked during that type of migration, you're going to have people from networking, from the cloud experts, from maybe Exchange, if you're moving things up there. A lot of different IT resources are definitely going to have to be leveraged from that standpoint. So the cost can definitely increase in that scenario. This next slide here, pretty straightforward, kind of looking at the root causes of a lot of our cybersecurity breaches. Don't think it's any huge surprise. 48, almost half of all breaches are from a malicious or insider criminal attack. On the flip side, we have 27, or almost a quarter, of human error, and about a quarter are system glitches. Now, one thing I think to point out from this slide here is the cost per incident is one thing that we don't see on here. The cost per incident on the malicious or insider user attack is averaged at about $157 per record. Now, if you look at the human error and the system glitch, respectively, will be $131 to $128 per incident. I think that's pretty, maybe not, it's completely obvious, but if it's a human error, usually, obviously, that person's going to know that they did something, so they can report it right away. And what we'll see here in just a little bit, and I think actually the next slide, that mean time to identify and that mean time to contain the breach is going to really affect on how much cost goes into what is actually lost. The other thing I think to note here is, even though it says 27% is root causes are by human error, There's a chunk of that with that malicious or criminal attack, and we'll talk about phishing in a little bit. A lot of that chunk is going to deal with the fact that humans were the weakest link to actually have these malicious and insider attacks actually work. So although it gives you a good kind of overview of what's going on, I think there's a lot more on the human side than that 27% that we're kind of showing there. Okay, let's go through kind of some key findings here that we just went through, so we'll flow through these pretty quick. Global cost of data breach increased in 2018 from 2017. And again, resource here was the 2018 Ponemon Institute report, as well as the Verizon Data Breach Investigative Report. So we had 6.4% total cost increase, 4.8% per capita, and 2.2 size as far as the number of records. The United States and Middle East had the most costly data breaches. Hackers and insider threats comprised of 48% of total breaches, like we just saw. Again, I think it's important to note, although that is the case, I think a lot of it has to do with those human errors or lack of processes, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation here. The faster the breach can be identified, the lower the cost. I think that kind of makes sense. But when we look at mean time to identify, in 2018, it was 197 days. Now, I don't know about you, but kind of just think about that, like kind of let that settle in here. You get breached, and this is something we'll talk about again when we talk about advanced persistent threats and people kind of taking their time to exfiltrate data. But this is 197 days after you have been exfiltrated, or you've been actually hacked, or you've been compromised in some way. That's the time it takes you to identify that breach. And after that, the mean time to contain that is 69 days. So those are, quite a bit of time between the time that somebody actually gets in your network to the time they actually identify and actually contain that, or at least mitigate what actually happened. So both the MTTI and MTTC, or the mean time to identify and contain, were the highest for malicious criminal attacks versus human error. Again, I think that points back to, if it is human error, hopefully people don't, put their head in the sand and don't mention it for fear of their job or whatever other consequences might come. But I can see that's the reason why. Malicious and criminal intent, we might take a while to figure it out. People might not be monitoring log files like they should be. Maybe they don't even have, some sort of SIM or some sort of detective or preventative measures even alerting on these things. So I can see that being the case, whereas human error, usually it's a, oh boy, I got to tell my boss, and kind of go from there. So we can kind of see where that actually correlates. The third-party involvement cost increase did increase by 13% for compromised record. Again, that's just having more folks that you're having as contractors coming into your organization, and it's really tough to enforce or maintain the same security policies that you have to extend that out to your third-party vendors. Maybe they have a specific skill and they don't adhere to whatever you have to adhere to, even though you're responsible for doing that. There can be some either lag time that they actually get to that level, or maybe some miscommunication, or kind of dragging their feet types of things. So dealing with third parties can definitely be an issue and causing those to increase. Same thing with the cloud migration, as we talked about just a second ago. The big thing is on the key findings, and this is something where it gets to subjective costs. So we talk a lot about when we look at the fines that people get when we talk about Target or Yahoo or Facebook or Anthem and all these big costs, and they throw out these huge numbers like 250 million they had to pay out to people to do service or credit monitoring services and bolster their security and all those things. Those are objective type costs, but the subjective costs that I don't think we can really even measure is that loss of customer trust, which I think is probably one of the most devastating things, depending on your industry. And I think we'll kind of point this out. I think Facebook is kind of a unique example we'll point out in a second. Depending upon your industry and what your service is, that loss of customer trust can definitely equal loss of customers, and then obviously loss of bottom line. So you can really get some huge hits there as well. So from a subjective cost, totally can hit you really, really hard. Okay, let's look at some basic terms. Again, I apologize if this is very rudimentary for the folks on the phone here, but just want to get a couple things out here, and these aren't all of them by any means, just a couple that we'll definitely cover when we're going through this. First, actually, I'm going to jump down, and I apologize. I'm going to go kind of out of order here. I want to jump down to reconnaissance first. This is going to be when whoever it is, if it's an individual, if it's a nation state, and we'll talk about advanced persistent threats, if it's an organized group, a well-funded group, whoever it is, doesn't matter. Most likely they're going to do some sort of reconnaissance. If they pick a target, they're going to do some reconnaissance. Now, the reconnaissance can be a couple different, as we see, passive and active. Passive is going to be, I think, the initial information gathering, whether you're Googling or if you're a Binger, kind of like myself, I like Bing, anywho, or social engineering is a huge one. Going out to your social presence, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, whatever social medium you can grab. I think LinkedIn's a great one. We'll probably hit more on that in a little bit, but that's where you can see, and people have absolutely no problem putting out who they work for, what's their actual position, maybe even contact information, all those types of things. So now people can go out there and find out, okay, well, who's the CTO, who's the CEO, who's the CFO, so that I can start doing some phishing or spear phishing campaigns directed to them. And we'll talk again more about phishing in specific later, but that's where they can really get that foothold on a lot of not sensitive by any means, but a lot of public information that will make things like these phishing attempts or emails actually look very legitimate, to where they can actually have people fall for them. The dumpster diving one, during this, obviously we're doing this via a GoToMeeting, and I was told that that video doesn't kind of display very well, might be choppy. What I really wanted to show you guys is a scene out of, I think it's a movie called Who Am I? And if you guys have seen this, I think it's a fantastic movie. I think it was a German movie back in 2014, again, called Who Am I? I'm not trying to sell the movie. I just saw it, and it really did a good job of showing realistic ways to do information gathering and some certain hacking techniques. One of the scenes, they had these group of guys go to the dumpster site of a certain company. And so they kind of went through there, and they're fishing through a lot of things, and they found like a personal birthday card. And so they saw that it was to a certain individual. She might have had escalated privileges. Maybe she had some certain title. And it was known that she really likes cats in her birthday card. Okay, and that seems super simple and silly, but they use that information. Now they have her IP or her email address. They've got other names that work there. They can go on LinkedIn, find out their email addresses. Now they can spoof that email address to come from somebody that actually works there. And it could be a nice little attachment that says, hey, look at this kitty. Isn't this great? They're playing together, blah, blah, blah. Well, she clicks on it thinking, oh, this is totally legitimate, and then malware gets installed on her computer. That can be our attack pivot to where we can now do some other things, and we'll talk about that in a second. The active probing or reconnaissance is going to be kind of probing for the network host, IP addresses, services, etc. This being a little bit more risky because you're actually kind of jumping into networks and actually actively probing certain maybe common protocols, certain port numbers, things like that, to actually probe the actual network. So you can get a little bit of idea to decide, and I'm going to flip up to that top there, kind of that first one, that attack surface. Attack surface is going to be that threat vector or sum of all the possible attack points. So this is where we're going to look at a certain organization. If we pick a organization, we're going to do our reconnaissance. We're going to do our due diligence. We're going to find out who the key people are. We're going to see by doing some probing if they do have some, CVEs or some common vulnerability exploits, all different types of things. We're going to try and find every way that we can get in there. That's going to be our attack surface, and we'll start hitting it from all different angles. The attack pivot, usually this is going to be targeting a lower security host, so kind of get in maybe via that lady that loves cats. We'll kind of throw her that email, she'll click on it, we'll get our Trojan information or that whatever malware on her machine, and then we can actually take that and move what we call laterally throughout the network to try and find other areas that have a little bit higher privileges. So we can kind of keep probing and increasing that span throughout that network. And that's going to be our attack pivot. The attack escalation is kind of going off of that. Let's evolve that attack from that low to higher critical value. So taking Sally's machine that loves kitties, she doesn't have a whole lot of access to a lot of things, but we can at least do some now probing from there to find out that, where the databases are held, or another user that has more escalated privileges, things like that. We want to find out what's actually going to be our CVD in that next that bullet point, that critical value data or prized organizational data, the crown jewels. Whether this is, Coca-Cola's secret ingredient, or proprietary formulas, or manufacturing processes, anything. If this is going to be something that you want to steal from maybe a competitor standpoint, you're competing with a certain organization and you hire people or an organization, a nation state, or a well-funded organization to do these types of things, to pull out that type of information. A couple of things I kind of skipped down there, the RAT, or remote access Trojan, and command and control. Once you do get in there, that pivot point, you start escalating out. One thing that they definitely want to do, when I say they, the hacker or hackers, whoever that is, they want to plant things within your network as backdoors. So that if you do find out where you initially came in and they get wind of that and they close it down, they definitely want to install backdoors in multiple areas, multiple checkpoints, so that they can have different ways to get back in. And not to mention the command and control, once they do find that CVD or that critical value data, they're going to want to exfiltrate that, and however they're going to do it, whether it's a database query to pull information out to maybe a CSV file and throw it back out to them. That command and control is going to be their machine outside the network that they're communicating back to, or exfiltrating that data back out to. All right, moving forward, we'll look at some of the hacking techniques, and I'll try and cover these pretty quickly. Again, you'll see a list of here, so we'll kind of go through these. I don't need to read these here. We'll go through a few of these. And the one that's not on here, because I guess it's really not a technique, but it's more of a method, is the advanced persistent threat. We'll kind of talk about the end, kind of encompassing everything that we talk about here to target a certain organization. So first one, the fake WAMP. Again, I kind of go back to that Who Am I movie. I really love it. I think it's great. You guys should actually watch it. Again, I have no ties to that movie. I just thought it was a really good depiction of hacking and certain techniques. But in the movie, the fake WAMP, this is where one of the scenes, one of the guys took an actual remote router. He kind of stuck it to, I think, the bottom of a desk in a library, to where he could actually put a remote, basically a remote access point. Now, a couple caveats with that. So looking at this here, we talk about the keys to having a legitimate naming convention. So if I do go to a public library, or if I go to Starbucks or McDonald's or whoever, you'd probably want to know what their actual naming convention is. Maybe do something very, very similar. Maybe replace L's with ones, things like that, O's with zeros. So it looks like, physically looks like the same network, to where you can actually put that. So it'd be very easy for someone to mistake that. So you want to do that as well. You probably want to make sure that it's definitely an open or non-secure network with no password, which is very common in public places, like your Starbucks, McDonald's, airports, things like that. A lot of them don't have passwords on them. They just want people to be able to connect to them and maybe send off a couple emails or whatever it is they do. Extremely easy to set up and extremely easy to fall for, same kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be a cool device that they stick underneath a table. It could be just me with my laptop going out there and setting up my laptop to be an actual access point. And as long as I know that information before, I can set that stuff up, and people, and it doesn't take much. This is the other thing, by the way, an overall theme when we talk about any of these. It doesn't take but one person to fall for something for you to get access to something. And that's when we talk about phishing, as phishing is rudimentary, I guess, as you look at it. It's not the cool, you have to be super smart, the Mission Impossible, frantically typing away the keyboard to hack into the outer network. No, phishing is just throwing things out there like the kitty email for someone to click on to get your malware installed in their network. And then, yeah, you have to be pretty skilled to do network, lateral probing and things like that. But it's usually just getting someone to fall for something for you to get inside the door. And then you can take off from there. In any case, getting back to this, the fake WAP here, so once you're connected, you can have all that traffic, instead of going through Starbucks or McDonald's or whoever's router to go out to the internet, it can traverse your rogue access point and do inspection on all that traffic, whether it's a keylogger or you're just actually inspecting all the traffic. So a couple things you can do. My advice that I used to tell all my employees was don't connect to them. If it's free and it's open, no password, please don't connect to it. Just wait, do something offline and wait till you get connected somewhere else. If you have to, for whatever reason, make sure that you get the network name and password from the provider. Hotel, great example. They usually will give you the network name and password, stuff like that. Or have a host VPN to encrypt that data traffic. That's also a decent idea to do as well. Cookie theft. Cookie theft is going to be also known as sidejacking or session hacking. For the most part, some metadata is going to be sent from the website and stored in your browser. So this information, or cookie as they call it, can be sent to the web server to notify previous activity. So kind of customizing or making the session more convenient for you. The problem is if you have an unsecured connection, this can allow theft. Now, what's not going to happen is, or most likely is not going to happen, if somebody steals, quote unquote, your cookie, this can have them gain access to your account so that they can actually log into whatever account you're in. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they're getting access to your login credentials. In fact, most likely they probably aren't. But what they can do is they can log in as you without having that password by stealing that cookie or that session ID, and then they can actually change settings while they're in there. So then they can change the password to whatever they want. Totally up to them. Couple, I think, examples of this is like if you want to use, like Google has an API transparency report. I think it's Google transparency report is the website to plug in the website, see if it's safe, things like that. Those are kind of some of the ways that you can get away from having these things happen. Definitely always visit, and this goes for not just cookie theft, for any kind of browsing. Make sure you are going to an HTTPS website. I think all the major ones, like if you just type in google.com, it's going to force you to go to HTTPS, google.com. Most of them are doing that anyway. And then always a good practice, use a host VPN to encrypt that traffic from your local machine. Bait and switch. This one's pretty straightforward though. Leverage the internet clickable ads to divert malicious sites. This is super annoying, as you guys probably agree with me. If you don't, browse in incognito mode or some other, take those security settings off. Browsing the internet nowadays is super annoying. You get pop-ups of, if I was on Amazon searching for, diapers, I get diaper ads constantly on every website I go. It really depends on which site you're at. So it largely depends, again, on the host site, like your advertiser. Things like Facebook and Google, they should have pretty good safeguards. So they shouldn't get any of these malicious click and or bait and switch type ads that get thrown in there. So if you're going to less popular sites and you're clicking on ads in there, you definitely have a possibility or chance of actually getting redirected to a malicious site. To gain, whether it's credentials or anything that you're doing when you're browsing there. In fact, clicking on certain things might even install or download some sort of Trojan or malware onto your machine to give them access to your computer. Again, what can you do? My big thing is don't click on ads while you're browsing. This goes for almost anything. Anything that gets solicited to you and you didn't initiate it. This goes for phishing too, which we'll talk about in a second, especially in email. Don't ever click on things like that. Don't ever call numbers that get sent to you. Don't click on links that get sent to you. If it is solicited to you or people are asking you for certain things, especially if it's personal information and you didn't ask for them to do that, don't do it. Make the initial connection. Know that you're connecting up to your bank site. Know that you're connecting up to whoever else before actually entering any kind of information like that. Absolutely. Clickjacking, this one's otherwise known as UI redress. This one here, it kind of lays an invisible, not kind of, it does lay an invisible frame over the site that you're seeing. So basically invisible buttons. So it's even creepy enough as has the buttons that follow your mouse, so any click. Some of the common ones that I saw, or that we have seen, I guess, that happen using kind of a clickjacking technique. Facebook, there was a clickjacking problem where it was abusing the quote unquote like functionality to where it was actually pushing or promoting people, or unbeknownst to them, that they were actually liking the page that they were on. So people were getting more likes. So I guess more from a not terribly malicious standpoint, but just falsely having pages being liked or certain articles being liked. Twitter had a clickjacking problem where there was retweeting locations of malicious pages, unbeknownst to the users. And I'd say probably one of the most notable examples of clickjacking is the Adobe Flash physical settings, or sorry, the plugin security settings. It made it to where it could go in and actually change those security settings to utilize either your microphone and or camera. So actually turn that on. So that could be, I don't know, a little creepy, I think. People actually looking at you via your camera or hearing everything that you're saying. Could be a bad deal. Again, a couple things to do: update your security browser with built-in defenses, ad blocker type software, host solution that has a list of known clickjacking sites, things like that. This one here I kind of put in here. This is, I don't know if I've seen this very often lately. I did see this a couple years ago quite a bit. In fact, my dad fell for one of these. God bless his soul, but he got one where I think the FBI, if you guys remember this one, the FBI popped up. I mean, it wasn't the FBI, but it popped up a little screen that says, hey, you need to pay $500 for, and I can't even remember what it said. I gave a number, and my dad actually fell for it. Or these here, the browser lockers, where it actually pulls up a screen like this one here, and it tells you, hey, click on that back to safety, or hey, do you want to fix this, to click on this button, but it really wasn't fixing anything. It was actually installing something, so it was doing the exact opposite of what you thought it was going to do. These are really annoying, but in any case, point is when these things pop up, this is another great example. You'll see that they have a technical support line down there, 844, 507, whatever. Don't ever, again, if it's unsolicited information being sent to you, don't ever use that information. Even if it's legit, maybe it is legit. Make sure that you are initiating that contact, whether it's via email, whether it's via phone number, however. Don't ever take that unsolicited information and think you're actually going to somebody who's legitimate. One of the things that I saw too, by the way, not just this browser lock, it was kind of a different one. People were actually calling our staff at my last job, and they were claiming to be a Microsoft representative. They even went so far to say they're Microsoft ID, all these things. And they said, hey, we've noticed you're having problems with your computer. You just need to go to this website so that I can remote into your machine and I can fix these things for you right now, free of charge, no big deal. Well, most of our users, well, actually all of them did. We never got hit with that one, but I can see a lot of folks that maybe didn't have a security and privacy awareness training course where they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I don't want, my boss to know that I'm not keeping up to date or whatever. And they do. They go out to the website and they go and they log in. That person, it's not LogMeIn or it's not TeamViewer, but it's something like that. And they get in there and they install malicious software. They say everything's fixed. They leave. And unbeknownst to you, now you've got malware on your machine. And that's going to be their attack pivot point, and where they're going to start actually doing some lateral searching on your network to actually, hopefully, in their case, exfiltrate some valuable data. Again, here, a couple of things: the host solution to block malicious online sites. And again, do not call any numbers provided or click on any links within that message. Anything unsolicited, I think that's a golden rule. Don't deal with it. Don't click, don't call, don't do anything. Okay, a couple more here. IoT attacks. I think in a society with I must have the latest and greatest gadget out there has caused a lot of problems in the last few years. You got the exciting new products and features. Everybody wants them. But there is definitely a general public disconnect with the security risks they pose. Your TV, your refrigerator, things like that. People are not even thinking about the fact that those can get hacked or those can be compromised, or even not so much hacked, but actually be controlled to where they're now actually part of a bot network that's actually doing further hacking. So they can be used as a bot to do other types of things. I mean, these are things that people most likely don't even think about. Again, AC, refrigerator, TV, those types of things. Most people with these types of devices, those passwords, usernames, defaults, those are all left the same. So with anything, not just IoT devices, your routers, whatever the case may be, cameras that you install to watch your babies at nighttime, whatever, make sure you're changing at the very least the default username and passwords. That's the very least. That's the first thing to get out of there, because that is the super simplest way, because that stuff is available on the internet, no big deal. If you leave in default, you're just opening yourself wide open. Place on different VLAN if possible. That's definitely something you can do as well. Don't leave it on the default VLAN that you currently have. Anything that you're dealing with, those devices, whether it's through your router or Wi-Fi, use that strong encryption. Don't, the strong, I put in there at least 15 characters password. I would say use passphrases, and this is always going to be an argument, so I might have people groaning right now on the phone. I definitely prefer passphrases over passwords for a lot of reasons. Passphrases are easier to remember for folks. They can be in sentence format, they can have spaces, they can have capital letters, they can have punctuation. Those types of things, anything over 10 to 12 digits, brute force is going to have a big problem with that. That's why I kind of put in at least 15 characters. And not to mention the traditional way that people kind of administer passwords, they make them so convoluted that you have to have a special character, capital, number, blah, blah, blah. And it's really hard for people to remember those. So huge fan of passphrases. Is long, at the very least, make them over 10 characters. And then things like keeping your software up to date so you can avoid those CVEs or common vulnerabilities, or hopefully zero-day attacks as best as you can. And this is another standpoint that I'll probably reiterate at the end. Two things: encrypting your data at rest and in transfer, and leveraging two-factor authentication. Those are two cheap and easy ways to really mitigate a lot of, making it a lot more difficult for those hackers to actually get into those networks. Credential reuse. I hear this one a lot, and I kind of like this one. So usually after following a data breach that had a bunch of login information that got stolen, in the wake of all that, people will use, they kind of blow it off like, okay, that's done and over with, but that credential reuse is very, very important. So in the case of Yahoo, in this case, so it got hacked and all 3 billion or whatever it was, and I think we look at it in a second, user accounts got hacked. So everyone's like, oh, okay, whatever, let's change my Yahoo username and password. But the problem is, what people do is they'll take all that information still, and it's not invaluable, because how many people, and you guys can raise your hands because no one can see you, how many people use the same password for multiple sites? And I would guess probably 50% of you guys are raising your hand. I was definitely a victim of it until just a few years ago. I leveraged something like KeePass, or actually it's LastPass, to generate all kinds of random passwords for me, because I did the same thing. I was super guilty of the exact same thing. And that's exactly what these folks are going to do. They're going to get that information. Okay, granted, you changed your Yahoo password, but whatever. They're going to use those same credentials to go to your banking sites and all the different places. And a lot of times they're going to be very successful to pull those in. Again, kind of looking at that, you may not be concerned because, oh, it's just my Yahoo account, but again, they'll use those same credentials to hack into other sites, which is, again, most likely the case. A lot of people do that. So obviously what you do, let's not use the same ones. Get something like KeePass, LastPass, OnePass, whatever, or if you can change all your passwords and keep a mental note of them, or a secure place, I would definitely inform or do that. Keep informed of what sites or companies have been breached. Make sure you subscribe to certain sites that will give you that information, so you know that ahead of time. And then use a password vault application. And then one of these things here as well, if you ever want to see if your credentials, at least from like in this case Yahoo, if that email address has been compromised, things like this, haveibeenpawned.com. You can put in your email address and it'll let you know if it's been used other places, things like that. So think of it this way too. It's not just going to be your Yahoo account. Well, Yahoo is kind of a bad example, but when we go to Facebook, if you use that Facebook, it'll be an email address account to sign into Facebook. Most people, that when you sign into other things, it'll give you an option. Hey, do you want to use your Gmail account, or do you want to sign with your Facebook account? Most people do that. So not only are you compromising your Facebook account, but also any site that you're logging in using those accounts. So it's a good time to use that website right there. All right, phishing. And this one I'm going to try and keep brief because I can talk about this for probably an entire hour. It's been, it's subjective, but a lot of security professionals think 90 to 95% of all major hacks start with phishing in some sense or some way. That's how they get their foot in the door. Phishing is very successful because it's easy to do. It's easy to mass do tens of thousands of emails. And like I mentioned earlier, it just takes one to get in. And we'll see what that happened in the case of Anthem here in just a second. But this is a type of social engineering. We're going to attack the user instead of the device. It's a lot easier for me to go to the bank teller and say, hey, by the way, what's your code? And they actually give it to me, than rather having some James Bond thing putting up there, put my ear to the whatever, the dial, and try and hear clicks, which I don't understand how that's even possible, but I'm not a safe cracker. But it's much easier to ask for the keys, and that's essentially what they're doing. AOL, way back in the day, in the 90s, if you guys remember that. I'm sure most of you guys on the phone probably do. The way they were doing it was they were calling people saying, hey, by the way, I'm an AOL technician. I need your credentials. We're going to do some changes. They gave it to them. They got free internet. It was that simple. They just gave them the keys. Microsoft technicians calling users, kind of the example I just gave you, saying, hey, go to this website, blah, 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 and go ahead and log in. Spoofed email from CEO to CFO asking for money transfer transaction. I put that one in there specifically because that actually happened at my last job. And thank goodness my CFO actually went to the security and privacy awareness training, because he got an email from the CEO, it was spoofed, that said, hey, I need you to transfer 10,000 whatever dollars to this. I know we haven't gone the approval process, but this is a deal that we need to get done today. And the CFO, and they must have known this, was literally there for about 3 weeks. So imagine you as a CFO, your CEO sends you an email from what it looks like that, and she's asking you specifically, I need this right now. Well, that puts you in a really weird position, like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But thank goodness this person was actually emailed me and said, hey, this looks kind of goofy. She's never asked for anything like this. And sure enough, if you just hit reply and look at the email address it's going back to, it wasn't going back to the CEO. It was going to some random email address in like the Bahamas or something like that. But those things happen, and that's a very low-level spear phishing attack. They can get very, very sophisticated, but that's just an idea of how they do those things. And I guarantee you they went on LinkedIn, found out who the CEO was, found out who the CFO was, and did that spear phishing attack and pointed directly to that person. We had a couple of ones too. This one, the job applicant with PDF resume attached. We saw that a lot. We were supposed to get the PDF resumes from it was either ADP or something, I can't remember. We had a few people that, again, they must have been going on LinkedIn. They were sending resumes to managers who were making decisions on jobs. Even though it wasn't going through the right process, these people could have easily clicked on that email just to view it and be like, oh, let me take a look and see this person. Thank goodness they didn't. They sent it to me again, and we got it to the right people, and it was a completely spoofed and malicious email. So tons of things from a phishing standpoint, and these are just kind of electronic. It can be phone calls. It's any kind of social engineering that can really get those keys to the kingdom just by simply asking. Now, granted, they mask the way they do it. It's not as easy as I think the AOL examples back in the day, but that's how they kind of get in. We'll kind of talk about how that happened in Anthem as well. What to do? User training. You've got to train the humans. You've got to train your employees. Okay, I'm going to kind of go through this quick. I just noticed the time. We're getting short on time here, so we'll kind of flow through some of these fairly quickly. Facebook, as you may or may not have remembered, we had about 90 million user accounts hacked. Mark Zuckerberg, his account was actually hacked. One of the biggest things was the vulnerability in the code as the view as tool. So if people wanted to, say you block somebody, and you want it to actually view, like your dad. You don't want your dad viewing your profile. So you hit the view as tool, and you could select your dad, so you could see what your dad would actually see. Well, that tool was actually passing, and I won't get too detailed, basically the OAuth token to that user so that they could actually steal that OAuth token. And think of an OAuth token as the keys to your house or your car. Your house or your car doesn't care at all who's holding those keys. If you have them, you're going to get in the house and you're going to get in the car. That's essentially what was happening here. Facebook had to come out. They had to say, hey, this happened, blah, blah, blah. That bullet point where it says stock price tumbling ever since, that's pretty subjective. I kind of threw that in there because it did for a few days after it happened. But this is also one of those examples where it really depends on the service that gets hacked, whether you have that subjective reputation hurt. Because as much as I don't like it, things and services like Facebook, that social media, I think people's memories are really short, not to mention their vanities, and they just love Facebook, so they really didn't care. So that's kind of a disclaimer for that bullet point there. But GDPR implications, if anybody's overseas, or it doesn't even need to be overseas, anybody dealing with, like Facebook, dealing with folks in the EU, that can be a big deal. Those types of things can be up to 4% of global annual revenue, which 1.63 billion in the case of Facebook. So those are huge concerns for global organizations. This one will be real quick. Equifax, 143 million US consumers, had a lot of PII information in there. Their stock price did fall pretty significantly after that happened. Again, I think it depends on the actual service that's being offered. This is kind of shady. I don't know if you heard this in the news. 3 executives sold shares before disclosure. Unbelievably shady. That reminds me of like Enron or things like that. That's disgusting. But anyway, things like those types of things happen as well. This was because of the website where Apache struts, the common vulnerabilities, they were not patched. So they leveraged some vulnerabilities in the actual web software. Yahoo. Yahoo is a little different. This one had, it seemed like there was 3 different timelines. Like they had initial disclosure, I believe in 2016, actually 2014. The 2016 disclosure said 500 million users, increased to 1 billion by the end of 2016. And then by 2017, they said, oh, you know what? All 3 billion users accounts were affected. They required everyone to change their passwords, all these things. This one was a spear phishing. Well, most likely, as the experts say, spear phishing, most likely that they sent to a semi-privileged user. This user opened up that email, they got in on their computer and then started doing their lateral movements across the networks. What they were looking for Yahoo user database and the admin tool called Account Manager tool. Once they got in there, they installed backdoors to keep access open in case they got locked out in the initial attack vector, and then they exfiltrated that data, that database, user database, to their command and control computer that was sitting outside. This one also did use generate cookies to log in with no passwords required. Again, once they got into that and they leveraged those cookies to log in, granted they didn't have their credentials, but once they could log in, they could change those things, get those different tokens, and then pull out that entire user database and then use it obviously at their will, whether they change passwords, whatever the case may be. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll go through the Anthem data breach. A couple quick things. I think you guys probably remember this one back in 2015. 79 million users. I think it was more along the lines of 80, somewhere around there, million users. All their PII and some PHI data was taken. Very detailed records, as we talk about there. They valued it approximately $150 to $250 a record. This bullet point here, the $115 million settlement just this year, that's kind of skewed just a smidge. That was mostly for security improvements. Overall, they had about $260 million in their handling of that whole situation. Breakdown, $2.5 million went to expert consultants to kind of see what happened, kind of dig up all the causes. 115 million went to security improvements to bolster up their security after. 31 million went to initial notification to the public. And then 112 million went to providing that credit protection for, I think it was 1 or 2 years, if I remember right. Which, I don't know, you guys can have opinions on that, whether or not credit protection is really that awesome anyway, after you get that type of information stolen. But it does cost, in any sense, Anthem a lot of money. Not to mention careers being at risk. There's other things that we don't even kind of see about. People who actually were involved with this, probably because before the attack, their procedures were inadequate before. I wouldn't say because the attack happened, because those things happen, but it's either lack of preparation or the way that they handled it after it happened. So quickly, let's kind of look at Anthem. The timeline here started somewhere around March 2014. I think the latest, again, this kind of speculates, but I think the latest one I saw was February 18th, specifically, 2014. It was discovered January 27th, 2015 by Anthem and their sysadmins, and we'll talk about how that happened. 2 days later, they actually alerted the federal authorities on January 29th. And then February 4th of 2015 is when they actually announced it out to the public. So it did take a little bit of time there, but at least after they found it, it only took a couple days to notify the actual authorities. This one here, and again, I'll try and be as quick as I can here, but get the main points. This one is a good example of what we're going to talk about, advanced persistent threats, which it doesn't look like I'm going to have a whole lot of time to talk about. But this one goes through a multitude of different ways that they attacked, and they took their time. They did a lot of lateral scoping, pulled out information, made sure that they had custom software to have things installed on the network to pull information and at the endpoint exfiltrate 80 million records out of a database, out of their database on the internal network. So these were not script kiddies. This is most likely a nation state. In fact, most people point to a organization. Actually, we'll talk about like TopSec and Deep Panda, which is going to be a Chinese sponsored organization, is what most people point to. But this was stuff where they went to LinkedIn looking for job posting, what kind of systems they have. That's another thing. You're going to see job postings so they can see what kind of databases they have, programming languages, things like that. All that information is key. Use that information to find out what kind of vulnerabilities they possibly could have. Reading press releases, as goofy as that sounds, but knowing the name changes, which comes into a very important point on this next one. They knew that they were called WellPoint before they went to Anthem. In 2014, and we'll see in this next slide here coming up, you'll see DNS records of somebody, and it looks like somebody from China who actually obfuscates and changes it to the Cayman Islands about 8 minutes after it was created, which we'll see in a second. They registered a website called WellPoint, but you'll notice it's WE11POINT.com instead of WELL. But to the naked eye, whatever, when you look at it, it looks pretty legit. So these people not only registered that domain name, but then things like MyHR, HR Solutions, external Citrix, which by the way, this was one where people were launching and logging into Citrix to access certain applications. But the point is, this was something that they were using so that they could take and send emails to folks using myhr.wellpoint.com or what looked like wellpoint.com. HR Solutions, IT type things with like Citrix to really, really confuse people to actually click on things to download software or type in credentials, because maybe they said, hey, you know what, your credentials have expired, please do this. Things like that. Your mailbox is full, go ahead and click on this to increase the size of your mailbox. They did a lot of things like that. But the initial part, that Reconnaissance was doing a lot of social engineering gathering, what systems they had, who was in what positions, who they could attack, who actually had escalated privileges to actually send that spear phishing email to. In essence, what they did, and this is kind of a goofy little DNS entry here, but point is, if you can see, and I can barely even see it, but you'll see that the WellPoint domain got created, and about 8 minutes later, they changed it from China to the Cayman Islands. One of the users, it ends up being a professor called Song Yubo, I believe, which was kind of weird because he was actually conducting a security competition sponsored by a company called TopSec Information Security Research Center of Southeast University, backed by the Chinese government, and was well known to have ties to Deep Panda. So that's kind of where this all came into this being a nation state attack on Anthem specifically to get this information out. And this could be, again, this could be a completely different webinar diving into the exact Anthem breach. This here is a overarching diagram kind of showing how this little network card down here, this is kind of their command and control center where they're coming in from. This little DeRusby, this is going to be the malware that they sent in there. What happened originally is they sent an email to one of the database users. They actually clicked on it. They had that computer as their command and control or their pivot point, and they were going around and finding out where the databases were. Eventually, they used his credentials to do database queries, and that's how they actually extracted those 80 million records out of the database to then exfiltrate out to their command and control center. Again, this is a super high level rundown of what we're doing. What was neat about this malware though, and this is another thing with advanced persistent threats, you're gonna have custom malware. It really masked itself to look like Adobe Reader or Microsoft ActiveX applications to really further look innocent. So when people saw these things, they didn't think anything of it. No big deal. So these things are infiltrating through their entire network to get to the ultimate goal of that actual database, to exfiltrate that information using legitimate credentials So even if that data was encrypted at rest, which is a very, very important point, if they get legitimate credentials like these guys did, it doesn't matter. That's going to go ahead and decrypt it for them and then send it out to here. What was crazy was, and again, this kind of goes through just what we just talked about. There's a phishing email asking for user information, escalated privileges for attack pivots, blah, blah, blah. There were some known vulnerabilities and that custom tools. That was that Derusby custom tool. They took their time. That's another thing, again, with advanced persistent threats, which I know we're running out of time. I probably won't get a whole lot of time to talk about that. And this is something they took a really long time. You'll notice the timeline was February of 2014. It didn't get noticed until months later, and they really didn't get anything cleaned up until even months later after that. So they definitely took their time getting this information out of there. One of the things kind of to, oh, that's the same one. The way they discovered it, by the way, inadvertently and probably a bit lucky. The guy, or it was a guy, the individual that got hacked or actually clicked on the phishing email originally, he did start noticing accounts that already had logged in, and he started noticing a lot of queries going on that weren't him, that he wasn't doing. So he actually took notice and did some digging and then actually reported it. So that's a good thing, I guess. The human being element actually saw the activity going on and actually reported it. So wasn't so much a technical solution per se, like a IPS or something giving you an alert. It was just the technical solution as far as the log files are concerned, but actually the human diligence and awareness to actually take action. So again, I think getting back to the human training and things like that is super, very, very important. I've got like 3 slides left, and I just saw the time. We're going to run through these really quick. Advanced persistent threat isn't really a technique. We went through a lot of different techniques that people can use. Advanced persistent threats, I think in the beginning, were really, really honed in on nation states, like your China Deep Pandas or your Russian Fancy Bear or those types of organizations out there. But there also can be just highly funded organizations. And what's really scary about advanced persistent threats is think of it like, or just think of like China backing certain people, or Russia, or whoever it is. These folks are going to be fully employed to do hacking for you, and they're protected by these organizations. So there's really no threat for them to go to jail, to get caught, to do anything. So think of that from your perspective. If you had a full-time job that you got paid for, and you probably got paid pretty well, depending upon how good you did, and you had no threat of really getting any ramifications for the illegal activity, quote unquote, that you were doing. I mean, it's kind of scary, these different organizations out there doing things like advanced persistent threats, which is just I think a methodology of leveraging everything that we just talked about and more, probably a lot of things that I don't know about, especially custom malware applications, to hone in on a specific target, steal that data for, like we mentioned, political espionage, financial gain, not to get political, but like hacking of the DNC or the Office of Personnel Management, pulling out federal contractor information. That's huge. That can be leveraged for blackmail. There's a lot of different things in those. Those can get really, really scary as far as that's concerned. And very quickly, reconnaissance, I think we talked about that. They're going to go very, very in depth on reconnaissance, how they get in there, how they gain that expert access to the network. And again, phishing, I think, is a huge part of this. Then once they get in, they're going to probe the network to find out where the actual CVD is, or that critical value data. They're going to establish multiple entry points, whether they're remote access Trojans or just back doors so they can get back in. Even if they find out about things, they've got ways to get back in. They're going to gather that target data and then exfiltrate that data, usually in a very, very slow manner, so they don't raise any flags. These aren't the types of hacks that people get in and get out and leave. These are the types of hacks that they sit in there for months and years. Then quick 5 signs, and I know, again, I'm going very, very quick. Elevated late logins. I think most people think, and I don't know if this is completely true, that people from across the nations or across the globe are going to be doing hacks on the other side of the globe. So that's why you're seeing the elevated late night logins. Widespread backdoor Trojans, well, that's obvious. Hopefully your systems are seeing that. Unexpected information flows, data bundles, and then focused spear phishing campaigns. If you really start seeing your executives or people in high-level positions getting these emails, you probably need to pay attention to what's going on, see what's really going on. Again, what you can do, these are quick ones as well. Get your C-level folks involved. So you can get the funding, the backing, because no one, you can have a security guy on staff, and I've seen this, I don't know how many times, blue in the face telling you everything that I'm telling you and even more. But the C-level guys, they don't care. They don't really see the value of it. It's just more money out the door, and they don't want to deal with it. Definitely get them involved. The CIS top 20 controls, pull those down. Take an unbiased look at your network. It's a good starting point. Encrypt your data at rest and transfer. I think this is a very simple and easy way to do things, as well as activate two-factor authentication. But as we saw in the case of Anthem, if they get legitimate credentials, that data at rest really isn't going to make any difference. Identify any CVDs. Take a risk-based management approach. Any contractors, BAs, vendors, vet out that chain supply. We saw this was the #1 way that we can save money. That incident response plan, absolutely important, unbelievably important actually, to make sure that you guys have staff or somebody that knows what to do in case this does happen, and immediately. And I think this one's huge. I mean, I was a trainer at one point, so I'm really special to this one. Educate your staff. Again, a lot of people think phishing is the main way to get in, and two, it only takes one person to screw up, and that's the hardest part about this. You can have defense in depth, you can have the coolest technologies, you can have everything, but if you have this, it's tough. It's really tough. My quick lasting thought, anything, the computer chip can technically be hacked. Think of it from your cars. We've seen that from the videos of the Jeep getting hacked and braking and steering and doing all that goofy stuff. Hospital equipment infrastructure. So it could go from record data breaches to record number of lives lost in latest hospital attacks. So it could get really ugly. So I think these things are really important. I apologize for taking up the entire time, and I know it was kind of rushed. Maybe we can, in a future webinar, we can kind of hone down more specifically on things. It was a lot of stuff to cover. I absolutely appreciate your guys' time today. Hopefully you learned at least something today, or at least something to think about as far as your security and practices are going. With that, Anna, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. So before we wrap up, I just want to let everybody know that there will be a survey that pops up after the webinar. Please let us know what you thought of today's presentation and if you have any questions we weren't able to answer. Also, if you liked today's presentation, I also want to let you know about our next webinar, which is scheduled for April 17th. This webinar is Preventing Data Breaches with Go Anywhere, and it's a great follow-up to what we covered today. We'll explore how our secure managed file transfer solution can help prevent successful breaches by encrypting data in transit and at rest, following compliance requirements, and more. So be sure to save your spot since the event is less than 3 weeks away. We will stay on the line for a couple more minutes to answer any questions you have, but it does look like all of our questions have already been answered throughout the webinar, so we'll let you go. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.